Most systems do not announce when they change. They continue operating. Transactions still occur. Prices still move. Activity still looks normal. From the outside, nothing appears different enough to justify concern. There are no alarms, no declarations, no visible rupture that would signal a transition. The system still accepts input. It still responds. It still clears most of what passes through it. But something subtle has shifted. The same action no longer produces the same result every time. Not because the rules were rewritten, not because participation stopped, not because the system is under stress, but because response is no longer uniform. At first, this difference is easy to dismiss. It looks like noise, like inconsistency, like timing. One execution clears immediately, another lingers, one adjustment resolves cleanly, another requires patience. A third does not resolve at all, at least not on the same terms. Nothing is broken, nothing is failing, nothing is visibly constrained, and yet the system has begun to discriminate. This is not discrimination by identity or intent. It is not selective in a moral or strategic sense. It does not favor optimism or pessimism. It does not reward conviction or punish hesitation. It is discrimination by alignment. Some actions pass through the system as if nothing has changed. They encounter depth. They find counterparties. They resolve without friction. They feel ordinary enough that no one remarks on them. Other actions encounter delay, not rejection, not refusal, just delay. They sit longer than expected. They require additional steps. They clear partially or at worse levels or only after adjustment. They behave as if the system is waiting for something that is never explicitly requested. This difference does not show up everywhere at once. It is uneven. It appears in pockets, in specific contexts, in certain conditions that are difficult to isolate from the outside, which is why it takes time to notice. Participants assume the issue is local, temporary, specific to the moment. They attribute the delay to execution, to timing, to congestion, to chance. They assume that next time things will behave normally again, and sometimes they do. That inconsistency is what makes the change hard to recognize. If the system rejected everything, the shift would be obvious. If it slowed everything, the shift would be measurable. But when it responds selectively, when it clears some actions immediately and lets others linger without explanation, it becomes difficult to tell whether anything fundamental has changed at all. This is how asymmetry enters a system quietly. The system has not become illiquid. It has not become unstable. It has not withdrawn participation. It has become conditional in practice, even if not in design. Conditionality does not announce itself through absence. It announces itself through uneven response. In earlier phases, response was automatic. Participation arrived by default. Clearing was assumed. If an action met basic requirements, it passed. The system absorbed variation. It smoothed irregularities. It provided continuity without needing to be asked. That automaticity no longer holds universally. Some actions still trigger it, others do not. The difference is not explained. It is not documented. It is not formally acknowledged. It exists only in behavior. Over time, participants begin to sense this. Not consciously at first, it shows up as hesitation, as caution, as a subtle change in how actions are structured before they are submitted. Participants begin to pre-adjust. They simplify, they resize, they alter timing, they break actions into smaller pieces, they choose paths that feel more likely to clear cleanly, not because they know why certain actions stall, but because they have learned, through repetition, that some forms pass more easily than others. This learning is not centralized. It is not coordinated. Each participant arrives at it independently based on lived experience. One delay is ignored, 2 delays are noted, 3 delays change behavior, and once behavior changes, the system responds differently again. This is how asymmetry compounds without escalation. The system does not force a reaction. It does not demand compliance. It does not punish non-alignment. It simply responds unevenly. Over time, that unevenness reshapes behavior more effectively than any explicit rule change could. Actions that clear cleanly become more common. Actions that encounter friction become rarer, not because they are prohibited, but because they are less efficient. This is the key distinction. The system is not enforcing constraint. Constraint is emerging as a byproduct of response. No one is told what to do differently. No one is warned. No one is corrected. They adjust because the system feels different. Importantly, this adjustment does not feel urgent. There is no pressure to act quickly, no sense that a window is closing, no visible consequence for continuing as before. Participants who persist in using actions that encounter delay are not penalized. They are not excluded. They simply experience more friction. That friction is mild enough to tolerate, at least initially, which is why many do. They assume the system will revert, that conditions will normalize, that whatever caused the inconsistency will resolve itself. But nothing resolves because nothing is officially wrong. The system continues to function. It processes volume. It absorbs flow. It produces outcomes. From a distance, it looks stable enough to trust. Yet within that apparent stability, the texture has changed. Depth is no longer uniform. Response is no longer symmetrical. Clearing is no longer guaranteed to be immediate. None of this implies stress. Stress requires pressure. Pressure requires accumulation. At this stage, accumulation has not yet occurred. What has occurred is differentiation. The system has begun to differentiate between actions that fit comfortably within current conditions and actions that require the system to stretch. It no longer stretches automatically. Stretching now requires willingness. And willingness, as established earlier, is no longer default. This is the first moment where conditional participation produces observable effects, not dramatic effects, not visible failures, but differences in how similar actions are treated. This is the moment most observers miss because they are trained to look for events, not gradients. They expect change to arrive through disruption, through volatility, through headlines, through signals that can be pointed to and debated. What they are not trained to see is the absence of uniformity. Uniformity is rarely noticed when it exists. It becomes visible only when it disappears. When every action clears easily, no one asks why. When some actions clear easily and others do not, questions arise. But because the questions do not have clear answers, they tend to be set aside. Participants tell themselves the delays are incidental, that they will average out over time, that the system is too complex to behave perfectly. All of this is true, and none of it changes the underlying shift. The system is no longer smoothing all variation. It is selecting which variation it absorbs. That selection is not strategic. It is not conscious. It emerges from constraints that are not articulated publicly. The result is a system that still appears open, but is no longer neutral. Neutral systems treat all qualifying actions equivalently. They provide predictable response across contexts. They make outcomes a function of inputs, not of conditions. This system still does that in many cases, but not in all, and the exceptions are increasing. This is where timing begins to matter. Not timing in the sense of urgency, but timing in the sense of alignment. Actions submitted at certain moments clear easily. The same actions submitted at different moments encounter friction. The difference between those moments is not obvious from the outside. It is not tied to news or volume or volatility in a way that can be easily modeled. Participants cannot point to a single variable that explains the change. They can only say that sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. That uncertainty changes posture. Participants become less willing to rely on assumptions. They leave more room for adjustment. They keep more flexibility and reserve. This does not reduce participation, it reshapes it. Participation becomes more cautious, more selective, more conditional, which reinforces the system's behavior in return. As fewer participants are willing to absorb friction, the system encounters less willingness overall. That does not cause collapse. It causes selectivity. The system responds by allocating its limited willingness where alignment is strongest. Again, not deliberately, not consciously, not strategically, but mechanically. Alignment here does not mean agreement or intent, it means fit. Actions that fit current conditions clear. Actions that require accommodation wait, because accommodation has become expensive. The system does not explain this expense. It does not publish it. It does not announce that accommodation is now limited. It simply stops providing it universally. This is how systems transition without breaking. If accommodation were withdrawn abruptly, the change would be obvious and destabilizing. Participants would react, narratives would form, volatility would appear. By withdrawing accommodation selectively, the system allows behavior to adjust gradually. Most participants do not react at all. They adapt without noticing that they are adapting. They learn which forms feel smoother. They avoid forms that feel heavier. They attribute the difference to experience or intuition. Over time, those intuitions converge. What emerges is a system that still processes volume, but processes it unevenly. This unevenness is not yet punitive. It does not force exits. It does not produce losses that demand response. It produces inconvenience. Inconvenience is a powerful shaping force because it does not trigger alarm. People tolerate inconvenience far longer than they tolerate loss. They adjust quietly, they optimize locally, they stop expecting uniform response. As expectations shift, the system's new behavior becomes normalized. What was once seen as an anomaly becomes accepted as how things work now. This is the moment when asymmetry becomes embedded. At that point, the system no longer needs to change further to have effects. The effects propagate through behavior. Participants who remain aligned continue to experience smooth clearing. Participants who are not aligned experience delay. Neither group feels targeted. There is no signal telling anyone which group they are in. The distinction is only visible in outcomes. This is why the transition can persist without attracting attention. There is no story to tell. Nothing dramatic has happened. Nothing has failed. Nothing has been withdrawn. The system is simply less accommodating than it once was. And accommodation, once reduced, is difficult to restore. Because restoring accommodation requires surplus, it requires capacity, it requires willingness that is not currently available. The system does not regain these things simply because participants want it to. It regains them only when conditions allow. Until then, selectivity remains. This selectivity does not guarantee stress. It does not guarantee escalation. It does not guarantee that the system will move toward any particular outcome. It guarantees only one thing: the system will no longer carry all actions equally. This has implications that are not immediately visible. When all actions are treated equally, participants can rely on models, assumptions, and historical averages. They can plan based on expectation rather than observation. When actions are treated unevenly, reliance shifts from model to experience. Participants trust what they see, not what they assume. This reduces scale before it reduces activity. Large, assumption-heavy actions become less attractive. Smaller, more flexible actions become preferred. This is not because participants expect danger. It is because they feel less certainty. Certainty does not need to disappear to change behavior. It only needs to become conditional. And conditional certainty behaves differently. It favors optionality. It favors reversibility. It favors actions that can be adjusted without consequence. This does not mean participants withdraw. It means they adapt. And adaptation in aggregate changes the system further. As behavior shifts toward flexibility, the system sees fewer actions that require accommodation. This reduces strain, but it also reduces depth in certain areas. Depth that is not used decays. This decay is gradual. It is uneven. It is almost impossible to measure in real time, but it matters. Because when the system later encounters pressure, it will respond based on the structure that exists at that moment, not on the structure that existed before. At this stage, there is no pressure, there is only differentiation. The system is still open, participation still exists, outcomes still occur. But the assumption that any qualifying action will be treated the same way no longer holds. That assumption has quietly expired. Nothing replaces it. There is no new guarantee, no new rule, no new baseline. Only observation. Participants who notice the change do not announce it. They do not publish it. They do not frame it as a turning point. They simply adjust their behavior and move on. Those who do not notice continue as before, occasionally encountering friction they cannot fully explain. Both groups coexist. This coexistence is stable for now. Stability does not require uniformity. It requires tolerance. As long as participants are willing to tolerate uneven response, The system can continue indefinitely in this state. It does not need to escalate. It does not need to resolve. It simply operates with asymmetry. This is the defining feature of the current phase. Not fragility, not stress, not anticipation. Asymmetry. The system is still functioning, but not all paths are equivalent anymore. Some are easier, some are heavier, some require patience, and no one is told why. That is the change. Nothing else has happened, and nothing needs to happen next.